to understand the mechanism of breathing, we have to understand first how the respiratory organ, that is the lungs, are placed within the thoracic cavity so as to achieve the main aim of taking in and releasing out the gases. So let us try and understand that first. The lungs are placed in the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity is the portion which is above the abdomen. Now this thoracic cavity has different structures in such a way that the lungs are placed within the thoracic cavity, they are well protected, and at the same time they will be able to perform the act of respiration. Now this lung structure is well protected. On the dorsal side, we have the vertebral column which is going from the top to it runs throughout the dorsal side of the body of an organism. That is, we are talking of human beings over here. So, dorsal side is having the vertebral column. Vertebral column present on the dorsal side. The ventral side has the sternum. The ventral side has sternum. The lateral sides have the ribs and the lower side has the diaphragm. Lower side has the diaphragm. So these constitute the thoracic cavity, and within this are present the lungs. So they are very well protected within this entire structure of the bones. So they are placed, we call that cavity as pulmonary cavity. Now the lungs, all of you know, are constituted by alveoli. These alveoli are the main sites of respiration, and the lungs are covered by a very thin membrane which is known as the pleural membrane. This pleural membrane covers the entire surface of the lung, and within that pleural membrane is present the pleural fluid. This pleural fluid has two major important functions. First, it prevents the friction between the lung surface. When the lung contracts and expands, this friction is smooth, the friction is lessened, due to which the movement of the lungs become easy. Second important thing, the pleural fluid also protects the lungs. So it is kind of keeping the lungs moist and also prevents the friction, because the lungs are in contact with the ribs. The ribs are bony structures, so they are rough and hard. And the lungs, on the contrary, are very, very delicate structures. So they have this pleural membrane which prevents the friction between the two surfaces. Now, as we all know, when we try to understand the mechanism of the breathing, we know that breathing involves the inspiration and the expiration. So the inspiration and the expiration will constitute the breathing cycle. This breathing cycle therefore comprises of two major steps: inspiration, or we also call as inhalation, and expiration, or we call it as exhalation. So the breathing cycle has these two phenomena taking place simultaneously to bring about the process of respiration. The movement of air in and out, that means from out to the inside the lungs and from inside to the outside of the lungs, is by the development of the pressure gradient. So unless and until there is a pressure gradient or the difference of pressure, there will be no movement of the air. In simple terms, if I say, for the air to move in and out of the lung, there has to be difference in pressure, and that is known as pulmonary pressure. Now, inspiration can take place only if the pressure within the lungs is less than the atmospheric pressure. So what will happen if we say air has to move to the lungs? The pressure within the lungs should be less as compared to that of air. Then only and air will be having high pressure. So from high pressure to the low pressure, that is how, if we write this way, high pressure, and this has to be low pressure. So this movement will take place only in that condition, and this is known as intrapulmonary pressure. So the one condition which is for inspiration is that the pressure within the lungs should be less than the should be less than the outside, and that is known as a negative pressure within the lungs. Exhalation, on the contrary, will take place when we say expiration is the movement of the air out from the lungs to the air. So over here now it has to be low pressure, and this will be under high pressure. Then only expiration or the exhalation will take place. How this is brought about, how this pressure gradient is brought about, it is by the movement of the structure which is known as diaphragm. It is diaphragm that brings about the negative pressure gradient within the lungs and high pressure gradient also within the lungs. And the movement of the diaphragm is brought about by a set of specialized muscles which are known as external and internal intercostal muscles. These muscles are present within the ribs, and here we have not shown the ribs clearly. They are actually forming a circular structure. So within these ribs are present the intercostal muscles, and when these intercostal muscles contract, as a result this lifts up the ribs, and this causes the sternum also to be pushed, and as a result the volume of the thoracic chamber increases. Now, an increase in the pulmonary volume increases the intrapulmonary pressure to reduce, and as a result the air from outside will rush inside the lungs. Now, when this happens, the diaphragm gets contracted. Like over here, if the pressure is less, then what happens? The pulmonary area will expand, causing the exchange of that lungs will be having the capacity to take in the air. Now, relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles again causes the sternum and the ribs to go back to the normal position, and they reduce the thoracic pressure, thoracic volume also. So this results into the loss of pulmonary volume, and as a result of this increase in intrapulmonary pressure, what will happen? The air will expel from the lung to outside. Now we have another set of muscles which help in the process of respiration other than the intercostal muscles. Now when we say the mechanism, therefore, is brought about by the movement of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, and as a result of which the volume of the thoracic cavity increases or decreases, thereby causing a decrease or increase in the intrapulmonary pressure or the gradient, and this causes the movement of the air in and out of the lungs. Now the volume of the air, which is taken in by, can be measured by an instrument which is known as spirometer, and it is often used to judge the pulmonary capacity. That means how well a person is able to respire, that is the taking in of oxygen and releasing of carbon dioxide.